much, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here today, and of course under very sad circumstances, because we're watching an end point of the colonisation, and we've come to the point where we're seeing a genocide unfolding in Gaza in front of our eyes. But today I'll discuss maybe a couple of different elements. So I'll discuss the Nakba, which is a continuing Nakba, the continuing ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian territory. We'll touch on the complete destruction of the Gaza Strip, look at the destruction of the Palestinian people as a group, and the widespread killing of Palestinians and the denial of their basic conditions, their basic necessities for survival. I think we need to first kind of roll back when we're looking at Palestine. So, as everybody probably knows here already, I think we're speaking to an audience that knows all this. But this didn't happen on October 7th. The Nakba and the decision and the objective to colonize Palestine, this has been going on for many, many decades. And even before the State of Israel, was recognized, we had Ben Gurion, who would then be the future Prime Minister of Israel, said in a letter to his 16-year-old son that we must expel the Arabs and take their place. And if we have to use force to guarantee our own right to settle in those places, then we have force at our disposal. The genocidal intent that we've seen playing out in Gaza is not new. This is echoed in the words of the Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir in 1969, when she asserted, "There was no such thing as Palestinians. When was there an independent Palestinian people with a Palestinian state? It is not as though there was a Palestinian people in Palestine considering itself as a Palestinian people, and we came and threw them out and took over their country, took the country away from them. They did not exist." The grave violations of international law that we've been seeing every single day playing out on our television screens since October the 7th did not start on October the 7th. There's been a long catalogue of decades of crimes, grave breaches committed against the Palestinian people. We'd over 1,000 Palestinian people killed in 2008 and 2009 during Operation Cast Lead. Over 2,000 Palestinian people killed during Operation Protective Edge in 2014. And there's been over 10 UN commissions of inquiry and fact-finding missions over the decades, cataloguing decades and decades of violations of international human rights and international humanitarian law against the Palestinian people in the occupied Palestinian territory, to the point that after the hostilities in May 2021, there was a permanent commission of inquiry established to examine the root causes, and that would look at all of historic Palestine. And we've had since 2015 a preliminary examination that was opened before the International Criminal Court, examining crimes under the Rome Statute, the most heinous crimes in the international legal order, war crimes and crimes against humanity and genocide. And this investigation, this preliminary examination, was opened in 2015. It went for a pre-trial hearing in 2020, and in 2021, the International Criminal Court opened an investigation into crimes committed in the occupied Palestinian territory. And the international community has been on notice of these decades and decades and decades of crimes and criminal acts, and has willfully stepped back and done absolutely nothing to intervene. And Israel has continued to carry out these crimes with impunity. The Palestinian people call what's unfolding in Gaza today a continuing Nakba. And the Nakba is the Arabic term that Palestinians use to describe the situation, the catastrophe that fell upon them in 1949 when they were expelled from their homeland. 800,000 Palestinians were expelled from their homes, with 531 Palestinian villages that were destroyed, and over 15,000 Palestinians were massacred. And this is the great catastrophe that befell the Palestinians. Thousands and thousands are today in refugee camps and displaced outside of Palestine and prevented from returning to their homes. And since its establishment in 1948, Israel has imposed an institutionalized system of racial domination and oppression over the Palestinian people. It created an apartheid state. And what we have are hundreds of discriminatory laws implemented against the Palestinian people. We have, even in 2018, an update to the basic law in Israel, saying that Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people. It is Jewish people who have the exclusive right of self-determination in Israel, and that settlement is a national value. The apartheid regime continued after 1967, when the territory was occupied, the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip. And we see the same types of discriminatory measures, the same types of discriminatory laws that we saw in Israel implemented across the occupied Palestinian territory as well, this time under military orders, so it's a little bit, the legal mechanism is a little bit different, but the discriminatory effect is the same. And we have layers of forcible transfer which continued. So during the Nakba, we had over 800,000 Palestinians who were displaced. In 1967, at the start of the occupation, we had over 430,000 Palestinians displaced in the Nakba. And this layers and these types of displacement has continued until this day. And we see a kind of, what some would call a slow genocide, but a slow destruction and destroying of the Palestinian people, their erasure and removal from the Palestinian territory. And there's various means of doing this. There's residency revocations in East Jerusalem. So Palestinians in East Jerusalem have a very precarious residency status. And this residency status can be taken from them after 7 years. So they have to continuously prove that their center of life is in Jerusalem. If they can't prove this, their residencies can be revoked by Israel. So it's very precarious, and there's many, over 15,000 Palestinians who have been removed from the territory in this way and transferred from the territory. There's many who have been removed from the territory through house demolitions. And Israel has routinely and systematically discriminates against the Palestinian people right across the Palestinian territory, but in particular in Area C and in East Jerusalem as well, where it's very difficult, if not impossible, to get a planning permission for a house extension or to build a new home if you're Palestinian. And this has been going on for decades. It doesn't account for the natural growth. So any building that's erected will get a demolition order and will be destroyed. And we've had another 15,000 Palestinians who've been forcibly displaced from this punitive house demolition policy. So since October 7th, we've seen the situation across the occupied Palestinian territory has really deteriorated catastrophically. And what we're seeing is an acceleration in these forcible transfer measures and this systematic removal and ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people. And we have some statements of intent from Israeli parliamentarians after October 7th. And the Minister of Justice, Gideon Saar, threatened that whoever starts a war against Israel must lose territory. Then we have the Israeli Minister of Foreign Affairs, Eli Cohen, who announced on the Israeli radio, on the army radio, he said, at the end of this war, not only will Hamas no longer be in Gaza, the territory of Gaza will also decrease. We had the military rabbi, Amihi Friedman, who applauded Israeli troops, stating, aside from the dead and the hostages, this is the happiest month of my life, because people have woken up and now they will establish massive settlements in Gaza. We had the Heritage Minister who suggested that Palestinians should go to Ireland or to the desert. And we have these plans and these commitments to shrink and take and appropriate and annex the Palestinian territory. And this has always been what it's about from day one, and it's a continuation of these settler colonial policies, with an end point of completely settling Palestine and completely annexing the territory and having the full removal of the Palestinian people. And in Gaza, we are witnessing now, in real time, the transfer of the Palestinian people to the southern parts of the Gaza Strip. We've already seen people flee from their homes in the northern part of Gaza. Israel has erected a new road slicing right across the Gaza Strip, splitting the north from the south, making it very difficult for people to come back. Anybody who's trying to get back up to the north at the moment is shot. We had a leaked document on what were the intentions for the day after. And this was leaked from Israel's intelligence ministry. And it has outlined various options for a policy regarding what would be done with the civilian population in Gaza. And there was the most favourite and the most executable policy was an option C. And this is where Palestinians in Gaza would be herded into tents in the Sinai. So they would be removed completely from the Gaza Strip, placed into tents in the Sinai. A new city would be established in the Sinai to facilitate them. And a massive buffer zone, a security buffer zone, would be created between the south of the Gaza Strip and the Sinai. So we're looking at intentions here and plans to completely and permanently remove the Palestinian people from the territory. There was a proposal, a political proposal, that was circulated in the United States Senate and the House of Representatives. And it said, and the plan outlined a plan for what to do with the Palestinian people, what to do with these 2 million people. And the plan contained conditions where aid would be conditioned on countries, development aid for different countries would be conditioned on them taking a percentage, a proportion of Palestinians from Gaza. So they wanted Egypt to take 1 million Palestinians, Turkey to take 500,000 Palestinians, Iraq and Yemen to take 250,000 Palestinians. That is the entirety of the Palestinian population of the Gaza Strip. These are the plans that are being circulated around in the United States. And this is what the extreme right Israeli political element want to see at the end of the day with Gaza. Currently within Gaza, there has been a detailed outline map. So this is actually an old map. It precedes October 7th. And it was an old map highlighting the different areas. It's a grid map highlighting various areas and designating various, just putting up Gaza into blocks. But after October 7th, this old map was resurrected. And they're using this map to issue military orders to transfer Palestinians in Gaza and evacuate them into different areas of Gaza. So they've used this in the north, highlighting different zones, and all Palestinians in those zones must then evacuate and leave. These orders and the map itself, it's very problematic. So people receive this map, it either is dropped down out of planes and scatters down on the ground. If you're lucky to pick one up, you might pick one up and see, oh, our area is going to be bombed and we need to evacuate. They've sent them as text messages to people's phones. And of course there's electricity, huge electricity cuts. There's communications blackouts. There's been a communications blackout in February for over 12 days. And yet Israel has continued to use this grid map as if it's some sort of humanitarian roadmap towards safety. And Palestinians are literally running into their own deaths. We have people who have elderly relatives, the sick, the infirm, pregnant women, people who are incapacitated. There is no provision made for anybody evacuating. Everybody is treated the same. There's very little time given. These maps are dropped out of the sky. People have to take their belongings and run. It's an absolutely catastrophic and inhumane situation. At the same time, in January the 29th, we had a conference in Israel, and it was attended by senior members of the Israeli government, and they called for the voluntary migration of Palestinians from the Gaza Strip, and they advocated for the resettlement of Gaza. And of course there had been settlements in Gaza up until the disengagement, and those settlements were dismantled. But the plans that we're looking at now are settlement cities. There's huge settlement plans for Gaza for the day after. We had, and there's been on the street various initiatives. So there was this Israeli state agent who published this piece of what and advertising this new settlement block and these new settlement villas. He later said it was a joke. However, the Israeli soldiers that are filming themselves and posting themselves on TikTok are also advertising parcels of land, saying this is where my shop is going to be, this is where my villa is going to be. These are real ideas and plans and initiatives which are being cultivated and supported by the most senior government ministers in the Israeli government. And this is happening in full view of us on our television screens. So we see this, and where I work at Al-Haq, we see this as it's not something that started on October 7th. We see this as the continuation of a massive colonization project that started with the State of Israel in 1948 in terms of Israel's policies and plans. The ideas for it and the Zionism was a little bit before this, but we've really seen it come to full fruit since 1948. And Israeli parliamentarians are coming onto news panels in Israel on Channel 14 and saying this is the Gaza Nakba. Gaza Nakba now, they are saying. They're crying out for the Gaza Nakba. And already we've seen 1.7 million people in the Gaza Strip who've been internally displaced. So that's 85% of the population. The practices of transferring people and having forcible transfer of the people in the territory is not unique to the Gaza Strip. Like the whole of the Palestinian territory, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, is on fire right now. And we're seeing very escalated patterns of forcible transfer right across the West Bank as well. We've had a very serious spike in settler violence, and settlers who are armed and threatening local Palestinian communities in the West Bank have forced the transfer of 15 Bedouin communities in the West Bank. So that's over 1,014 Palestinians who've been forcibly displaced just from settler violence from their villages since October 7th. We've had an expansion, an alarming expansion of house demolitions and punitive house demolitions, and there's been 1,700 Palestinians who've been displaced from house demolitions since October the 7th. At the same time, we have Israel is accelerating its land appropriations, and we have since January alone 2,640 dunams, which is 652 acres of Palestinian land, has been appropriated around the Palestinian villages of Abu Dis and Al Azariya, and this has been appropriated as state land. And there's been massive settlement projects which have been green-lighted around the West Bank. There's been an expansion of Maludim settlement, an expansion of Qajar and Efrat settlements with 3,400 settlement units. So we're looking at this is a colonization on speed. Like, it literally is, we're on fast forward here. We're really coming into the final furlong. While everybody is looking at the Gaza Strip, the acceleration of the settlements is expanding right across the West Bank, and it's really noticeable, and we're seeing irreversible changes on the ground. The second aspect I wanted to discuss is, it's something everyone is familiar with. Like, these are the scenes that we see like every day. The destruction of the Gaza Strip, the heavy bombardments, the absolute annihilation, the levelling of entire neighbourhoods, the indiscriminate attacks on residential buildings, hospitals, schools, universities. Literally, Israel is reducing the Gaza Strip to rubble. So far, there's been 70,000 houses in the Gaza Strip, housing units, that are completely destroyed. There's another 290,000 units in the Gaza Strip, residential housing units, which are partially destroyed. There is 90% of the schools in Gaza have been destroyed. We have all the universities in Gaza have been destroyed. There's 26 out of the 36 hospitals are either partially destroyed or not functioning. And what we're seeing here, this isn't, I don't like to talk about normal destruction, but we're not seeing here what we saw in 2008 and in 2014, where there was attacks on Gaza, Gaza was rebuilt. Gaza has been completely destroyed. This is a completely new level. It is absolutely annihilated and destroyed. It's going to take 70 years to get Gaza back to the point we were at in 2022. So by 2096, Gaza will be back to where it was in 2022. And in 2022, Gaza had already been limping. It was already nearly uninhabitable. It was already under a blockade for the last 16 years. We are talking about a very, very different situation today when we're talking about Gaza than at any other time previously. The General Director of the Palestinian Center for Human Rights, Raji Al-Sarani, had said that there's places in Gaza where you've grown up, it's your neighborhood, and you've grown up in those areas. And you can stand there now, you don't even know where you are. It's unrecognizable. You don't even know, there's no landmark left. There's nothing that resonates that this is the area that you grew up in. It's completely and utterly unrecognizable. What we're seeing here is something that we haven't seen anything like this since World War II. Like, this is a belligerent occupation. Israel is an occupying power of the Palestinian territory. It's supposed to be in a military governance of the occupied Palestinian territory. And what we have is the occupying power has completely destroyed a part of the territory. It's completely annihilated and destroyed the territory. And this is, we had this back in the occupations around World War II, where there was complete destruction by occupying powers. And this reduced the territory to a state of debilitio, of complete and utter destruction. And that was before the UN Charter, where once the territory was completely destroyed, the institutions of governance and the institutions of the territory were absolutely completely destroyed. Then the occupying power would annex that part of the territory. The United Nations has come out and said that what we're looking at is genocide. There's an intent to destroy the Palestinian people in whole or in part. And we also have genocidal acts that we see playing out in front of us in the Gaza Strip. Very early on, the UN Special Rapporteurs had issued a warning back in October. They sounded the alarm bells on genocide. The UN the UN Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination issued 2 warnings that we're looking at an impending genocide. Now we're looking at actual genocide. This hasn't been stopped, and now there's actual genocide unfolding and playing out in front of our eyes on the television. There's no food, there's no aid, there's no water, there's no medicines, there's no universities, there's no schools, there's no life. Life has been destroyed in Gaza. And for years, Israel has been trying to destroy one of the aid agencies, one of the main aid agencies it's in the Gaza Strip, but it's also in other parts of the Palestinian territory in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, and also other parts of the Middle East. It's the UNRWA, the UN Relief Works Agency, which was established to look after the needs of Palestinian refugees. But why it's particularly important in Gaza, 70% of the population in Gaza are refugees, and they have a right to return to their homes. And very senior Israeli parliamentarians see UNRWA and the protection of the rights of the Palestinian refugees as an existential threat to Israel. And we had, back in 2018, the Prime Minister of Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu, said that the UNRWA needed to be dismantled. More recently in February, we had Israel's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Israel Katz. He said that part of the Palestinian lie is that they are refugees who need to return to the state of Israel. We are working to remove UNRWA from Gaza. On the 2nd of February, the Israeli Minister Netanyahu said UNRWA is a self-perpetuating, also in its desire to keep alive the Palestinian refugee issue. And we need to get other UN agencies to replace UNRWA. On the day that the provisional measures were awarded by the International Court of Justice against Israel for plausibly committing genocide in Palestine, a different news story erupted on that day. We should have been hearing about how Israel had been held to account. This was world-leading news, and instead on that day, our news feeds were clogged and blocked with an attack on UNRWA, that UNRWA workers had been allegedly involved in October 7th attacks. The funding of UNRWA was suspended. 18 states that fund UNRWA suspended the UNRWA funding immediately, including the United States, who is the largest funder of UNRWA. And we had, as Palestine was slipping into famine, starvation, people are eating grass, people are eating rats, we have the aid agency that looks after Palestinian refugees, their funding cut and suspended. And it was only reinstated, the US funding was only reinstated a few days ago. It turned out later that the basis for suspending the funding was based on a 6-page report. The 6-page report was leaked to Channel 4, and Channel 4, when they did a news investigation on this, found that these claims were not credible, they were not substantiated, and bit by bit other states came on and found they weren't credible and not substantiated. And it has now turned out that the UNRWA staff had been detained and tortured by Israel and gave out forced confessions under torture. And all the while we have this fiasco with the aid being suspended and the funding for the aid being suspended, and Gaza slipping further and further into famine and complete despair. And I'll finish off with just what we're looking at next. There's news reports, and everyone's familiar with this, of the plans to attack Rafah. And Rafah is the final point of the plan when it comes to Gaza. The plan was to move the Palestinians who were mostly living up in the northern part of the Gaza Strip, move them down the south, move them down to Khan Yunis, move them down to Rafah. When they're all collected in Rafah, something needs to happen to force their transfer out of the territory. For months, the human rights organizations have been saying that when they carpet bomb Rafah, that is the last point on this plan, because the Palestinians will have to flee. No one is going to stand under these bombs and be blown to bits and bombed to bits. When the gates of Rafah open, there will be a mass exodus of Palestinians from Gaza, and this is the final plan. Iran has been a distraction. It was always a distraction. It was always a bartering chip to go into Rafah. We now have the green light for Israel to go into Rafah, and they're going to be going into Rafah in days. There is complete impotence and inaction and dysfunction at the international level. Our international institutions are dysfunctional and don't work. We've had a General Assembly resolution in December calling for a ceasefire. We had another UN Security Council resolution calling for a ceasefire for the month of Ramadan. During that month, Israel killed another 1,300 Palestinians and injured another 1,520. We have the UN Human Rights Council issued a resolution to ban for states to stop arming Israel, and yet Germany, the United States, the United Kingdom are arming Israel to the hilt. So when we look at the international community, there's blocks there, and we are left with no other option but to look at what can a sovereign state do. If we can't get action at the international level, we must be able to do something at the national level to do something and make this work and stop this absolute carnage. And I'll pass you over to Francis for this.